Did you know that there is a link between how much sugar is in your blood after eating a meal and your stress hormones, such as cortisol, which obviously impacts your hormone health? This is the Wild Wisdom Show, and I'm Dr. Patricia Mills, a holistic medical doctor with a root cause approach to health. And today we're going to be diving into the fascinating science on the surprising link between your blood sugar levels and your stress hormones, such as cortisol, which impacts other hormones like sex hormones like estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, your blood sugar hormones, obviously insulin, and even your thyroid hormone at times. And I have an amazing guest speaker joining me today, Dr. Susan Plank. She's a functional nutritionist, and we're going to be talking about all of this and more. So, hi, Susan. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Patricia.
Yes. And so, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about why you chose this topic and kind of like the high level information that will get them super hooked right away?
Sure, absolutely. So you can affect your health, your energy, your weight every single bite. Every single bite, you're in control. And so, but if you don't know what you should be eating, or you're eating the wrong things for your body type, for how your body can digest it and turn it into energy, which is the blood sugar, you are actually going to be self-sabotaging your health without even knowing it. And so, as a functional nutritionist, I'm very, very concerned with somebody's personalized health approach to just how they feel, but also to keep folks away from medication and surgery if we could do it with the power of a fork.
I know food as medicine, right?
Absolutely.
Now, we're going to probably have a range of people tuning in where some people are just listening for like to these concepts for the first time. And then some people are more advanced down the road of understanding this. So what would you tell someone who's just like tuning into this information and they kind of maybe get, or maybe they haven't really heard it? So what would be that information that you would like them to have as a background?
So I think the primary thing with blood sugar is everybody correlates blood sugar only to sugar, only to candies, cakes, chocolate. We know that these things, I think we inherently all know that the higher the sugar content of something, the worse it is for our health. But what folks, there's a real disconnect then when we talk about starches, or we talk about simple carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates. And that's where sort of the clinical aspects of blood sugar start to get lost and start to be very confusing to folks. And I want you to understand that blood sugar is more than just cakes, cookies, and sweets. So you can still have higher blood sugar, higher than what we want to consider normal, and not even really partake in those things on a daily or even weekly basis. And yet your blood sugar could still be paying the price for it.
And how could that happen? Like, how could someone who feels like they're eating a healthy diet could actually be unknowingly spiking their blood sugar levels too high? And the consequence of this is that their insulin hormone, like the immediate consequence of this, we'll talk about the other consequence, which is the stress hormone connection, but it's that insulin hormone then being triggered in its release and that being spiked up also too high. So you want your blood sugar levels and then subsequently your insulin hormone levels, which are released in response to your blood sugar levels, to be within the Goldilocks zone, not too high, not too low.
Right.
Because then if the insulin hormone is too high, over time, that will create many hormone health effects, like a domino effect on your other hormones, inflammation in the body, all that kind of stuff. But how could someone not be eating those simple sugars and still be having blood sugar levels that are too high after consumption of a meal or a snack?
So a couple of groups actually come to mind. One is they're aware of the sugar, right? The sugar of cakes, candies, and desserts and chocolates and things like that. But they might be considered what I call grazers, meaning they start off in the morning and they start eating, and they don't necessarily have sort of distinct meals in incorporating protein or fiber into those meals. So maybe they start off the morning with a cup of coffee and a banana as they're running out the door. And then, well, there's something at the office. I'm going to grab a protein bar. Protein bars, notoriously, I think they probably have more sugar in them than they do protein, a majority of them. But this pattern is exactly that. And that's what concerns me about grazers, is they're not taking the time to actually have sort of the set meals and make sure they're getting protein and fiber, which both help stabilize blood sugar. And so we'll see this sort of just continually happen throughout the day, where they go from grazing on one thing to the next thing. And then maybe they're going to have a sandwich at lunch, but then the bread or the bun, and then they go to the reaching for something in the afternoon. And the other group, in all honesty, I really, really worry about is vegans. Vegans and vegetarians. You go to the health food store, you're going to check out, and you hear somebody talking about being a vegan or vegetarian, but yet their cart can be full of all kinds of chips and corn chips and this type of chip, and they still want a snack. They still want to have those snacks. And again, it's what's in those snacks. Are they balanced for you in a way that gives you the protein and the fiber to help stabilize your blood sugar? So those grazers that sort of eat continually throughout the day, constantly keeping the blood sugar up and therefore the insulin getting kicked in. And also to vegans, just because I worry about, are they getting adequate protein? Fiber, usually they are, but are they getting adequate protein? And what are they really choosing good, healthy carbs to be their source of energy?
Oh, I so agree. Another group potentially is gluten-free. People eating a lot of gluten-free goods, and they typically have so much sugar hiding out in them to make them tastier, to compensate for the fact that they're not having the other usual ingredients in there that you would find in non-gluten-free products. And what I'll do is I'll just quickly explain for the audience, so that when we jump into the link between blood sugar and stress hormones, that this piece is just very, very clear. Now, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's 3 different kinds of carbohydrates, at least, that we know of. The first kind is sucrose, which breaks down into glucose and fructose, which is 2 of the most simplest sugars. There's one more, I forget the name of that one. And that's like table sugar, like what you're talking about when we think of cookies and pastries and that kind of thing. So it's such a simple molecule, so easily broken down into glucose and fructose, that the glucose quickly gets absorbed. You get that big spike, the big insulin response. Then the second category is the tricky one, which is starchy carbohydrates. So starch is a complex chain of glucose molecules all linked together. And that's what you find in like whole grains, beans, legumes, lentils, rice, quinoa, whole wheat, and in starchy vegetables like potatoes and corn and carrots and beets, right, being the big ones. And those ones, because they are encapsulated in more fiber, but they still have quite a bit of glucose chains. It'll be a slower release into the blood. However, it will still be quite a bit of carbohydrates, like those that break down into glucose. So when we say sugar, we also mean glucose. So they're equivalent when we're talking about the sugar in the blood. And so then you do eventually get a pretty big spike of blood sugar, unless it's buffered by the third category of carbohydrates, which is fiber, or protein or fat, or a combination of 3, or all 3 are a combination. And fiber is interesting because fiber is made up of molecules that are not glucose. So that's hemicellulose, cellulose, pectin. And they're like the cell walls, the cell walls of the plants, right? And then you have your higher starch vegetables that have the fiber, but they have quite a bit of starch. And then you have your lower starch vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, kohlrabi, all those other, lovely vegetables, basically. And they have the lowest starch to fiber ratio. So much more fiber, much lower starch, And so like celery being the lowest, probably. And so when you eat those fiber-rich vegetables first, And then it actually, because it's not broken down into glucose and the body actually can't absorb it, it gets turned into this nice coating, like this matrix of fiber that coats your intestinal tract, and it slows down the absorption of those starchy carbohydrates as well as simple carbohydrates. And I would even argue, actually, because I've worked with quite a bit of vegans and vegetarians, and you have as well, I imagine, that most of them are not eating, even though they're vegan and vegetarian, they're not eating enough non-starchy vegetables to buffer the starchy rices and beans, because in the world of vegetarian vegan, there's a need for a lot of food combination, right? Like combine your whole grains with your beans to get your.
Legumes and yep, exactly. Right.
But in order to do that, you need to have like half a plate, probably around 2 servings or so, at least, of your fiber-rich, non-starchy vegetables before your averagely palm-sized serving of starchy. So like a half a palm of rice with half a palm of beans, as an example. Unless you're an extremely physically active person, you can bump that up, right?
Right.
So what we're seeing is, I 1,000% agree with you, is that either you have these very busy people who, as you say, they wake up, they kind of either don't feel like eating in the morning, or they're on the go. So they grab that banana, that muffin, that cereal bar, or that protein bar, or whatever. And they eat that on the go. So it's spiking their blood sugar too high because it hasn't had the buffer of the fiber with it, right? Or enough protein to balance, to offset it, or the healthy fats. It's not a well-balanced start to your day, which we know sets off a triggering event for the rest of the day. But then, as you mentioned before, like lunch, if it's a sandwich, it's not that bread is bad, but the bread will not be sufficiently buffered by vegetables because it tends to be more bread than anything else, right?
Right.
You have your protein bar, as you mentioned, or your cereal bar, or your banana granola, even as you say, a banana or an apple on its own, if you haven't been properly like balancing out even your snacks, is going to be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we set the stage that most people are unknowingly living with the condition of the blood sugar spiking too high or too frequently through the day in response to their meals. Breakfast is usually the biggest offender for that one. Most people eat a pretty balanced dinner, but it's the breakfast and then lunch are kind of the problems. And as you say, the snacks, especially if they're frequent.
Right.
So now they've got these blood sugar spikes. What's the link between that and your stress hormones?
So again, we're looking at things can be changed in one meal, but we're tending to look at patterns and behaviors. And so if someone over time is continually pulling in too much sugar, starch, right? Not enough fiber, not enough protein, not enough fat. I want to convey this too. It can be even when you think you're making smart choices. Maybe you're going to go out in the morning with the smoothie, the protein smoothie, but in that smoothie you're putting in a banana and the orange and the apple. Again, we have to look at, because these sugars become cumulative, and sugar becomes a trigger in the body, and it will actually create a stress response in the body. And between sugar and cortisol, known as a belly fat hormone, those two sort of feed off of each other. The higher the cortisol goes, the more someone is stressed physically or emotionally, they're going to kick in that, oh, I need a pick me up. And that pick me up is usually sugar or a stimulant of some kind, nicotine, caffeine, something along those lines. But that becomes another stressor. And so here we go, as this vicious cycle throughout the day. And so it really is the patterns that people, the eating patterns, the behavioral patterns, when that really concern me, when folks don't take the time to actually know what they should be doing, but then how to do it in a way that's supporting their blood sugar health and their hormone health.
Absolutely. And I will link to a video, How to Eat for Hormone Health, that takes this all into account in a lot of detail. What I want to know as well, and also if there's something else that you want to address, please let me know. So someone's watching this or listening to this, and they're thinking, how do I know where I am, like if I have this problem or not? right? One way to know is if you've identified yourself as having these eating patterns, and you probably, you can simply assume, what it is that you have this issue, and then you'll want to watch the video and incorporate those eating strategies. But let's say you're really noticing an issue with your health, and you have the knowing that it's related to your food, and you want to do a deeper dive. Let's say they connect with you. Are there tests that you can do to kind of give people an understanding that this is the road that they're going down or that they're on?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. And that's, in all honesty, that's what sort of sets me aside as a functional nutritionist, is because I'm going to pull in the labs. Someone's symptoms, their individual symptoms are very, very important to me. But then I want to make sure to be thorough enough to cover the labs that can cause those symptoms. So we want to have a fuller picture, right? A whole health picture. It's not just about blood sugar. It's not just about a hormone. It's what's going on with that person's whole health. And so to be able to do that, yes, something like a fasting blood sugar, a hemoglobin A1C, which is your sort of an average of your blood sugar over a longer amount of time, insulin, a fasting insulin level, an insulin resistance score. There's some other ones, C-peptide. But those are some of the things that I just find so informative. And especially when we look historically, if we, pull the blood work off of if you're, have a health portal and look at that fasting glucose level over time. I always tell my clients, research wise, I want them to shoot for 84 as a fasting glucose. To me, 84 is an ideal number. For each point above 84, you're starting to look at a 6% increased risk of ultimately becoming diabetic. So when we look at 84, if we go above 90, if we go above 100, you're starting to be almost guaranteed that you're going to end up being diabetic if you don't change the power that you have with every bite of food that you're eating.
Okay, so a few questions that came up in my mind. So first of all, what would be some symptoms that if you were speaking to the person that you would be looking for that would cue you into them having this issue of the blood sugar levels being consistently too high, with potentially to the point where now your stress hormones are being activated and affected?
Mm-hmm. So again, blood sugar, my ideal number fasting would be 84, fasting first thing in the morning. But you know what? Maybe you are a person that you wake up and you have half a grapefruit and you have some toast and you have some coffee. And then mid-morning, maybe 45 minutes to an hour and a half later, you start to get these lulls in energy. You start to experience what I call brain fog, something that you just know, or you see someone, but you can't for the life of you remember their name. Things that are going to be a little bit unsettling for you, they are going to actually be the symptoms that will speak the loudest to you that, hey, this is potentially a blood sugar issue, because your blood sugar is rising fairly quickly with that half a grapefruit, toast, coffee, banana, whatever else you're having there in the morning. And then what goes up must come down, and it's going to come down. And when it comes down quickly, you're not going to feel so well. And something like the brain that needs a lot of energy to keep us all in balance, it's going to really suffer. And you can experience the same thing after lunch. If you have, say, a sandwich or something along those lines, a slice of pizza, something for lunch, and then at 45 minutes to an hour later, you feel like you could just put your head down on your desk, that you don't have the energy to make it through the day. We're looking at blood sugar. Number one I'd want to roll out there is a blood sugar issue.
Yeah, and I think also things that I've seen are food cravings, right? Because your blood sugar then, in response to being so high, the insulin goes so high, which causes the blood sugar then to drop
Right.
too low. It's like a reactive roller coaster ride.
Exactly.
So like food cravings, some people get thirsty, some people pee a bit more because the body's trying to get rid of that excess sugar. And you'll even like have a hard time staying asleep. You might more likely wake up and then need to go pee, right? Like those are things as well. And then just a comment on the coffee, because some people may not be aware of this. You wouldn't think that coffee would raise blood sugar, but It does, right?
Yes. It really, really does. And that's the thing. Again, blood sugar is really, it's compounded by things that are just blatantly sugar, but then it's compounded by those starches that we're talking about. And then it's compounded by things that we don't really necessarily think it's going to be blood sugar related, something like coffee and caffeine. And just exactly what Patricia was saying, when you start to have that lull of energy, that's what you're going to look for. Usually something that's quick energy, which is sugar, something that's maybe caffeine or a soda that's going to have sugar in it. Or for some people, if they're a smoker, it's going to be more nicotine, something that's more a stimulant to get them picked back up and to get the brain working again.
And then it's really hard to break out of habits that you're trying to break out of when hormonally and blood sugar level wise, it's not supporting you towards that. And coffee also causes your blood sugar to go up as a result of a stress response. So coffee on an empty stomach can actually cause your cortisol hormone to go up, and that can cause your liver to dump more sugar into your blood. So it's an indirect way for your blood sugar levels to go up. So there are people, and I actually at one point was fasting and breaking my fast with a coffee and then continuing to fast until noon, not realizing that I was totally messing up with my blood sugar response, and my stress hormone levels were just climbing up in the morning. And I've done shows on that, which I did on your the same talk I did on your summit for weight loss, talking about how to, if you're going to fast, how to do so for hormone health. And if you're right, and if you're gonna, and when you eat matters. So we're talking about how you eat and when you eat really matters, because if you put too much stress on the body, not only will blood sugar levels cause stress on the body, the stress, mental, physical, emotional stress, will cause dysregulation in your cortisol hormone, which will impact your insulin hormone, which will impact how it responds to sugar. So then it can create high blood sugar levels from that. So you can give yourself diabetes through stress.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. So, so typically we have our cortisol levels are going to be highest in the morning. So about 20 minutes or so after we wake up, we have what's known as a cortisol awakening response. But then that cortisol by lunchtime is going to have decreased pretty dramatically, and it's going to continue to decrease through sort of dinner until you go to bed. And so what Patricia is talking about here is very, very important. If you're someone, and I have clients that, hey, I drink 6 to 8 cups of coffee a day throughout the day. And the first question I want to ask them is why? What is the need? Why are you needing that much caffeine throughout the day? But then also, too, what is it doing to their blood sugar, and what is it doing to their sleep rhythms, their circadian rhythms, and their patterns? Even as they go into sleep. And you touched beautifully on these things at the Weight Loss Reboot Summit. That it was just very informative, the information you shared.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to kind of also ask you is, do you test for, so you test for blood sugar, like you test fasting blood sugar levels or fasting glucose, you test fasting insulin, and it's kind of fascinating how you may have a normal fasting blood sugar, but your insulin can be creeping up too high, because that's actually the first sign of you having a problem, is your pancreas will be releasing too much insulin in response to your meals. So that will start to go up because the body starts to become a bit damaged by how much insulin it's being exposed to. So it starts to develop insulin resistance. It doesn't respond as well to insulin, and the body compensates first with increasing more insulin. And you can actually catch that even before you're diagnosed with prediabetes. Isn't that so?
Absolutely. And here's the other thing: not all sort of cases of prediabetes are related to insulin resistance, but we have to make that connection. To make that connection, we have to start looking for these markers. We have to look for the numbers so we understand what's going on in your body and what's important for you. So we can look at things that are obesogens that we're finding more and more in our environment. They're chemicals, they're processes, they're plastics, there's things like that that once taken into the body become toxic, and they're known as obesogens. We have endocrine disruptors. So again, food with interrupting hormones, an endocrine disruptor can very easily do that. So this testing and the various testing markers are really invaluable to finding out what is the cause for you and what needs to be addressed to be able to start to reverse that process in your body.
So, okay, so you test for the blood sugar aspect. Then do you test for cortisol? Like, do you do cortisol hormone testing, or do you find that that's not too useful?
I actually do. I do it. Actually, interesting. I do cortisol and DHEA. I'll do it in blood work, but I also do it in saliva. Those hormones stay a little bit more stable in saliva. Plus, we can get readings throughout the day. I do both because then we have a comparison. As with anything with our hormones in the blood, they can change very, very quickly. So my fears, if we only relied on the blood, that somebody's driving down the road to go get their blood drawn, and somebody pulls out in front of them and they have to slam on their brakes, and what does that do to their stress hormones, right? So I always like to have it the same day they're actually doing the blood work, they're getting the blood work done. I actually have them do the saliva test the same day, so we have as close as a comparison as we can to look at those two mediums, whether blood or saliva, and get a much better understanding of their stress hormones, cortisol, adrenal hormone, DHEA, in blood and in saliva.
And what do you do with that information?
So that is those hormones. The adrenal stress hormones are anti-aging hormones. And so we look at that. That's really very beneficial when we look at saliva, and we can get multiple readings throughout the day, because someone might wake up complaining of not having a lot of energy, and right from the start, that's going to affect their eating habits. If someone wakes up and before they even make it to the kitchen to prepare themselves something, if they're dragging themselves out of bed and their cortisol, that cortisol awakening response I had mentioned earlier, where cortisol should be the highest out of the whole day in the morning to get us moving, if that's the lowest out of the day, that person's really dragging around, very fatigued. And it's going to be a real challenge if we don't realize that, to try to improve their energy, because something like B12 is not going to do it if it's a cortisol a problem. So again, the testing gives us the answers of where we need to look, how we start to dig a little bit deeper, what type of plan, personalized plan, gets put together for that individual. And then we can take into account too, if they're that fatigued, maybe we do need to initially look at something like maybe a food service or something that's going to be a little bit healthier foods that takes the pressure off them for that breakfast, if they just potentially can't do it themselves. They just can't do it in a healthy way because their body has really suffered so much.
Oh, yeah, I love this. So first, I want to just connect the dots for a few people, because we talked about too frequent and high blood sugar spikes increasing cortisol, and then you mentioned cortisol being too low. And so what happens is that there's like 3 different stages of stress. The first stage is you're coping well. The second stage is that your body is now kicking into kind of like preservation mode. It's like, okay, I now have my cortisol levels are so high all the time. I'm going to try to adapt to this. So there's a lot of adaptations the body goes through. And so you have enough energy, but you're kind of running on like a nervous energy because it's driven by cortisol. And then the third stage is your brain now is saying, you know what, we've got too much cortisol in the system. This is very damaging. It's very inflammatory. It's actually going to kill you. So I'm going to actually stop connecting with the adrenal glands. I'm no longer going to tell the adrenal glands to make cortisol. In a protective response, we experience it as a sudden, just like crash, like burnout, or maybe like a slow petering. But, you know, all of a sudden you have these mental and physical exhaustion. And when you do the blood work, as you were mentioning, Susan, your cortisol level in the morning, which should be high to a certain extent, not too high, not too low, Goldilocks range for that point in time in the day, would be too low. Now you're in what's called, some people would call it adrenal fatigue, but your adrenal glands are actually fine. It's just that the brain is no longer communicating with the adrenal glands to turn them on. And so what you end up having, as you say, is this low cortisol state. And what I love about your solution to one of your solutions to that, I'm curious to see what other ones there are, is that a medical doctor might listen to that and say, okay, the treatment for this is to give you cortisol. They'll give them cortisone, right? They'll actually give them, like, I think it's hydrocortisone or something. They'll give them like a supporting dose so that the body doesn't feel burnt out. But the problem with that is it doesn't address the root cause, like what caused that cortisol to go so low. So yes, it will make you feel better. And I'm not saying people shouldn't take that treatment should it be offered, because it may be necessary for you to be able to do some baseline functioning. But if you continue with that, whatever root cause, should it be the blood sugar spikes, right, over time due to the inappropriate meal timing and eating and snack, the quality and quantity and timing of that meal and snack is usually like one of the driving forces of that root causes. If you don't address that and you just take the cortisone, you're going to end up really suffering in the future. Like you may develop cancers or a heart attack, stroke, right? Like, anyways, it's usually not a good outcome. Your answer, one of your treatment protocols is to suggest a meal planning service so that you get, and ideally, here's the thing too, here's the caveat. Most meal planning services do not offer high quality hormone health supporting meals. So I actually once had to get a meal service to help me out when my children were quite young. I was building up my business while still doing clinical work. Like I simply didn't have the time. And yet I deeply recognized the importance of maintaining the nutrition. And I hear this often where working parents will say, or people who are busy and don't have a family, they'll say, oh, I got so busy, that's kind of fell off my plate. Like I just stopped really focusing on my nutrition and that kind of stuff. For me, thankfully, because I know so deeply this is how important this is, I was like, this is worth me spending a portion of my income on to guarantee that my health and my kids' health and my husband's health will be maintained during this period of higher work. Like I just had a heavier workload, right? And
where you can fill in the gaps, right? Where you can fill in the gaps. You're not saying, oh, I'm turning my entire nutritional health and my family's health over to some food service. But you want to look for something that's going to support you, right? That's what we need to start looking at and fill in those gaps for those crazy hectic days that like you just can't do it all because we all have them. Yeah.
And you know what I got them to do for me? All I got them to do was make vegetables.
Okay.
So I would like bake my own chicken. I would bake my own fish. I would cook my own rice in the Instant Pot. To heat up, toast a slice of bread, to have after my vegetables. But I got them, but I had to talk to them like, please only cook with olive oil or avocado oil or, unrefined avocado oil, unrefined sesame seed oil. I don't want any added sugars. I don't want any dressings that are not homemade with like the oil I mentioned or no sugar added vinegar, just, Himalayan salt, like that kind of stuff. And I really had to and they were wonderful. They accommodated my needs. Whereas other meal planning services, it was all either pre-made, pre-packaged, or they added in like dressings or salad dressings or things that not good. It actually would have those hidden sugars.
Sure, the things that you really want to avoid. Yeah, absolutely. I tend to gravitate towards more paleo. I like for myself, I feel better if it's in sort of a pinch. I always keep some vegetables ready to go and some I can pull out of the freezer. I have salad sort of always ready to go. But if I'm really in a pinch, I pull out a paleo meal and it gets me through, whether it's for breakfast or, usually breakfast or maybe a lunch. Dinner, I'm pretty consistent of it's going to be a good, healthy dinner. Yeah.
And what's a paleo meal look like for you?
Yeah, so it can be very much what you're saying, but it's going to be a meat and it's going to be a vegetable. I tend to stay away from the most grains. I tend to be very grain sensitive. My mom died of pancreatic cancer, and so a lot of me being her caregiver through earlier in my adulthood, I started to put together that the diet, when she actually was going through treatments and started to flourish on, was a paleo diet where we took out all the grains and all the rice. Now, I wouldn't say this is necessarily for everybody, but boy, when my mom was going through chemo, waiting to get a Whipple procedure done for pancreatic cancer at 80 years old, she said she was feeling the best she had felt in decades. So I turned that around and I tried it for myself. So I think for myself, there's that maybe a genetic predisposition, and I just feel better. And then just recently, I have a niece and a nephew that were both diagnosed with celiac. And yet, as far as we know, no one else in the family has been diagnosed with celiac. So for me, it's taking the knowledge that I know professionally and incorporating it. What's needed for my family, and that's exactly what I bring across to my clients. If you were my sister, if you were my brother, how would I want you to take care of yourself? That's what I want to sort of instill in you, the education, the knowledge, and that power that you can do this. You need to have the guidance to get yourself there.
Oh, that's wonderful. And is there anything else that you would like our audience to be aware of before we give like a nice take home message for today's episode?
Yeah, I think in all honesty, pay attention. You know what you're doing. Um, or you suspect. Let me put it that way. You most likely suspect that you have maybe some underlying health issues. And there's nothing more motivational for me, and I don't want to speak for Patricia, but probably for her too, that when somebody reaches out and says, you know what, I really suspect I might have an issue with hormones, or I suspect that I have an issue with blood sugar, but the testing just hasn't been right there to give me all the answers I'm looking for. Can you help me? That we love that, because somebody is so motivated that then you just know you want to work with them because they want to get it done. They're just are really there to get that knowledge and that guidance so they can take care of themselves and their families.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's so true. And before we get into the kind of take home message, the value of 84 for blood sugar, that was a US value. And I was trying to rack my brain and remember the Canadian value. I think it's 6 nanomoles per liter.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
Usually you want to have your fasting blood sugar ideally around 5.6 or lower. But if you start to get above 6 for your fasting, that starts to raise some alarm bells. So I'll have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's the value. And so, yes, so is there like a take home message that you want people to leave with today? Something that you think that, because sometimes we'll be listening and we'll not be really paying attention. And we just want to bring people back to like, what's the essence of what we want them to understand from our information today?
Yeah, the essence is we all struggle. Even when we know what we know and we do it for a living, but time makes it just makes the things a challenge. And so any program that you're going to do for yourself, I would say, please first make sure that you're carving out time to value you, to make sure that you're a priority and you and your family are the priority, because you might not realize this right now, but your kids and your grandkids, when they sit down at the table with you, they are learning. They are learning with every single bite, every single thing that you're putting on their plate and serving them. Not only is it done with love, but that you're doing it and they're taking that and nourishing their bodies with it. So I just find food to be so, like I said, empowering. And I just think people just need the guidance. And so you got this. There's nothing that we've talked about today that you can't do with a little bit of guidance.
Oh, 1,000%. Thank you so much, Susan. And I'll be putting in the show notes how people can get in touch with you, because you offer one-on-one services for functional nutrition. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And I'll also put in the link to that wonderful summit. So Susan hosts a yearly summit on Weight Loss Reboot, and gets experts. And I participate. I've had the privilege of participating in the last 2 years, this year and last year. So we'll put a link to this year's 2024. And also a link to the video on how to eat for hormone health. And I love how you said, for you, cutting out the grains has been really beneficial based on your family history and how you have responded to it. So use that as a template for where to start, how to eat for hormone health. And then, be interested and be a scientist, right? Kind of play around with it, see what works for you. And if you get stuck, or if you're unsure, that's when you want to link up with a health professional who has an understanding. Now, the difference between a nutritionist and a functional nutritionist is that my understanding of this, when I looked into it, was that a nutritionist has a more one-size-fits-all approach. So it's like a general nutritional plan, whereas a functional nutritionist will do that more detailed lab work as an example, which will then inform a more personalized protocol that will.
We're always looking outside of the box. Let's put it that way. We're always looking outside of the box of what is going on in that person's body, what are their symptoms, and what do we need to do to be able to get them feeling the best that we can.
Yeah, a more root cause approach, like what is that person's root causes?
That's right.
And how can we address them? So just like functional medicine compared to non-functional medicine, a root cause approach versus not. So thank you so much, Susan, for your time. It's so precious. And we all appreciate you showing up here for us today. And I hope for you, the audience, whether it's evening, day or night, depending on when you catch this, I hope you are well. And I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, Patricia. Bye.